Just see. Okay. So a big welcome to this afternoon's session. Those of you just moving away from Anne Taylor and coming across, so there'll probably be a few of you coming in late. Obviously, the session is being recorded, so big welcome to those of you joining live, but also those who are listening back as well. Just coming towards the end of today's conference, it's been a fantastic experience so far. I'm absolutely delighted to have Charlotte and Antonia with me this afternoon, just for the session to look at about how we look at increasing female participation and engaging with female fans in a much more effective way. I've been very privileged to have chats with both Charlotte and Antonia over the last few months, so I know it's going to be a really great session. Charlotte is being a complete martyr for those of you just tuning in. She is suffering from COVID, which is why she has the largest pot of tea in front of her, for which I am completely jealous about. So that's kind of where we are. We'll obviously explore a lot of things. There will be opportunities for you to put questions in the chat, so do that by all means. That should be really good. With that all said, I'll let the pair of them introduce themselves, and then we'll start the conversation and get to a really great place. So let's start with Antonia. Antonia, just introduce a bit about yourself and I suppose in my world, how you've been kind of changing football.
Okay. Thank you, Neil, and thank you for inviting me to this event, and thank you to all the amazing women out there in football. Our community is really, really important. Hi, Charlotte. We haven't met before, but it's been a pleasure so far. I am a Werder Bremen fan. I am German. I lived in London for the past 20 years, but I just moved to Berlin now. I have been the CEO of SD Europe until last week, a European organization representing football fans from all over Europe and also Africa. And we also work with a lot of member-run football clubs. So I think I have a couple of things to say to this. And maybe in parts also I am suffering from PTSD disorder because of being a woman in football. It's quite a ride, but I'm looking forward to it.
That's we'll come back to that definitely, Antonia. So Charlotte, then explain a bit about yourself and also your kind of role as well.
So I'm Charlotte. I'm a head of women's football at Copper 90, but I've been around football for about 15 years via companies like Sports Revolution and TalkSport and the FA. So I too can talk to the PTSD of being a woman in football, and we'll go into it later. But we were actually talking just before this about how over the last few years that seems to have changed a lot, and it's actually you kind of feel like you're more accepted, and it's in a really good place now, or at least heading in the right direction. I'm a big Spurs fan for my sins, although last night pretty happy, so that's good for both the men's and women's team. And yeah, really looking forward to being part of this event, and yeah, thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So obviously for me, I think the best thing to start and to frame this session is literally kind of what kind of experiences have you had, the worst experience. I think everybody always wants to know this. It's kind of like, what's the worst experience you have within football or with a particular brand that's kind of football related? Just to kind of frame how well is the game actually doing? Are we actually, what are we actually up against? The kind of big bit of that. Charlotte, we'll start with you because you're still dominating the middle of my screen.
That's a big question. I think I've got probably not the answer that you're looking for, but I think my worst experience, especially kind of from a brand and club, is more the fact that there has been no experience. And I think to me, that's almost worse than doing it badly. So my first job at Sports Revolution, we looked after all of the advertising across 96, well, about 45 football clubs across the country. And as part of that, we would do advertising in the concourse and in the male toilets and not the women's. And it seems really silly, but what you're essentially saying is that the women that go into football don't need to be seen. You don't need to communicate with them. They're not good enough. You don't need to be in the ad campaign. We're not going to even sell you this audience. And for me, that's something that stuck from quite a young age. I was 18, 19 when I first started working there. So for me at the time, I guess I didn't think of it as I would now in but why are we not advertising to women? It was, well, football's not a place for me. So I should be really privileged to be here and work here. And that kind of set the agenda for me, both professionally and socially within my friendship group as well. And it really changed my relationship with football. We did a lot of work with brands that were doing experiential events at football grounds. And again, nothing against the brands that we worked with, they were great. And they were targeting men because that's what they had been sold to. But then you're experiencing football as a woman from a different point of view, because you're then looking after promotional girls who are working at football, and you're listening to what fans say to them, and that then football's not necessarily feeling like a safe environment for them. I was working for a brand who, I won't say the name, but their slogan at the time was "Feel the Difference." I was wearing a hoodie with their slogan on because that's what I was working on. And I had "Feel the Difference" written across my chest. And you don't need to use your imagination to think how football fans reacted to that walking around a football stadium. So for me, I think it's been everything. It's a kind of lack of visibility. It's that lack of communicating that football is a place for women that has actually had more of an effect on me on both a personal and professional level than any brands doing it badly or doing it wrong. Because at least if they're doing it wrong, they're trying to do it, they're trying to market to women's football fans. But by not talking to women's football fans, you're creating a much bigger effect in what you're not saying than what you are.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And Tony, same question to you really about the kind of, your kind of bad experiences with it, and how things can possibly change as well if we lead on from there.
Of course, I thought about this, but there's so many bad experiences, and I don't want to create this bad vibe about all of this. But I think as a match goer, the worst experience for me was a game in third division in Italy. There were no women's toilets, there were no facilities, and they had to ask all of the men to leave the toilet, and then a man patrolled the toilet with a dog to ensure that I could go to the toilet. And that wasn't obviously the only one. And this is not that long ago. Then as a woman working in football, particularly with football fans, I think what has become apparent is that in the supporters organizations, so that really want to have an influence in their football clubs, be involved in the decision making to some extent, the amount of women or female fans involved is pretty small. And you have a few really big supporters organizations across Europe that are now led by women. But when you ask them about how they got there, they only got there because they had a sort of extra invitation showing them the doors wide open, and it was a woman showing them that door. Women or female fans, they don't go, that's my experience, and I'm sure there are others out there, they hardly get to where they are now by being asked by men to join or being invited by men to participate. It doesn't happen. It's always the sort of reaching out by other women to get into it. And I think that shows how important these networks of women in football are. And I have also a couple of positive examples where, like, a club in Sweden, biggest club in Sweden, Malmö, they have a women's ultra group of more than 250 women involved. They're hardcore fans. They're not, accompanying wives of anybody. And they have women on boards. They have women on every layer of the football club, and that really makes a difference. But I'm sure we get into that at some point. But I think that in terms of organized football fans, which is obviously my territory, you can still see that there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
It's really interesting. Obviously, so today we've just launched our report looking at it, and some of the big things that were highlighted was the huge representation of women at senior levels of football, but also the kind of mass, the lack of facilities for women in football stadia, and the kind of lack of consideration for women, and that came quite clearly in our report. So, I mean, I just wanted to pick up on that. So, kind of, obviously, if we want to appeal to women, we want women to become more involved in the game, what are the kind of big problems that a female fan is being put off by? What are the kind of things that you're seeing that just stop that participation, stop that kind of wanting to go through the turnstile on a Saturday afternoon? What's the reason for that now? I'll start with you, Antonia, and then I'll ask the same question to you, Charlotte.
I think one of the issues is that clubs are trying to market female fans differently. A friend of mine told me about this example of a ice hockey club in Sweden where they offered female fans free tickets together with a ride to the mall to get their makeup done for free. Whilst everything that I actually wanted was to meet the coach, see the changing room, and whatever else a fan would want to see, but it wasn't what they were offered. I think that was a big problem, or that in general is a problem. But I think that the major problem that's not just affecting women is that, you know, clubs really need to think about who they are as a club. It's about the club's identity, and then everything else falls under that. And I think that way too many serve white men and don't really look at it, and they don't believe that they need to create safe spaces and that it's about diversity and inclusion. If you want to be a club, what does it mean to be a good football club? For me, it's maybe slightly different things than to others, but I think that that's what it is. It's about like a real opportunity for football clubs to change that now, to really look into it and not putting off female fans by trying to work out what they want. Because very often, and I'm sure Charlotte agrees with that, as a woman, you don't really get the feel that you are even asked or that, you know, you're even seen. And I think the problem that we all face as women in football is that there's always the need, or it seems to be the need, to justify why you are a fan or to explain that you are a fan. And I don't know how many meetings I have attended where I was asked whether I like football. We spoke about this earlier. And whose secretary I was, or like, I don't know, nobody would ask that any man working in football or attending a game or whatever. And I think that is what needs to be changed. There needs to be room for different types of fans. There's not one single fan. Neil, you are a fan, different fan to me, how I define being a fan. But I think what needs to be understood is that there's diversity. There's no one single fan. There's also not one female fan. You know, everybody still is a different type of supporter. And I think that's something that clubs need to adopt in their DNA and then work from that.
Thank you, Antonia. Just a quick note in the chat, you can see that there's a comment through from Tranmere Rovers who are listening in. Obviously, I've had quite a good connection with a few Tranmere people recently, and they've got to the female vice chair and working with clubs in that whole stuff. So I'm aware of that, and they're making really good strides to get their understanding. I think that does make a difference. But Charlotte, coming back to that question that we were talking about there, what would be your kind of view on that as well, Charlotte?
I mean, yeah, Antonia touched on a lot of the stuff I said that we've in our little pre-chat that we were talking about, and there's kind of so much to explore, from making the stadia a safe space for women to go to, because it's just not at the moment, and that's almost a completely different conversation. But I think by outwardly talking and showing that you are making moves to that, so, you know, partnering with organisations like Her Game Too, who I know you guys were speaking to earlier, and I think just kind of showing outright that, you know, we're here and we're supporting you. For me, kind of outside of work completely, as a woman going to football, knowing that I'm going to a club that openly celebrates Her Game Too, I know that if I hear any abuse, I feel really comfortable that I can go to a steward, and I know that there are processes involved that's that's going to make a difference, or that I can feel safe and I can feel protected. Whereas in other clubs, where there's maybe more of a laddie culture, you might not feel safe that you can go and have those conversations, or that, yeah, I think knowing that the club, it has the same values or shares the same values as you is really important. There's the kind of on the ground, how are you going to make the actual match day experience better? there's some things that are going to be a lot harder to stop. Like if I go to the football on my own, I will still get asked, am I using my dad's season ticket? No, my dad doesn't even like football. Like I went on my own because my husband's an Arsenal fan, so obviously I'm going to go to Spurs on my own. So there's that kind of like, how can you actually change the attitudes of people in the stadium? And that's obviously, it has got a lot longer to go. But then if you start to take a step back and think about kind of how you're marketing and your imagery, and are you making sure that in all of the images that you're using on your website, on your posters, in your advertising, again, as a club, are you showing a diverse mix of fans? You know, in this specific context, we're talking about women, but I guess that goes for all diversities. And like, can I see myself as a fan there? When I go to the shop, am I going to have access to the same kit that the men's do, or is my shirt going to be pink with a lower V? Not that it's a football example, but it was Irish rugby famously got it wrong when they used women models as opposed to the actual female players for their women's kits. And whilst that's not football, there have been some quite famous football kit moments as well, that again, that hasn't had that kind of process and thought through. So I think if you want to make women feel more engaged and feel like they want to go to the games, actually start to show that they're there, celebrate the women fandom, the female fans. And then I think there's also, going back to Antonia's point that we were discussing earlier about like feeling as a woman going to football, you really feel like you need to know your stuff. Especially working in football, I always used to revise before I was taking any clients to games to make sure that I knew kind of the last 5 results, and I could name everyone on the pitch, and like I would end up knowing more than most people there just because I'd done my revision, because nobody else there would get asked, but do you actually like football? That you say you work in football, but do you actually like it? And actually, can we start to explore what being a football fan means, and actually making women and actually just more football fans see that it's more than just who knows the most, and there's so many different areas of fandom that can be explored. And at Copper 90, it's where kind of we sit in that cross section of football and fan culture, like football plus fashion or music or art. And actually there are so many different ways that you can celebrate your fandom, and it's okay that you just support England major tournaments because you love the celebration and it's everything that's right about football when you're all together. And that's okay that's what you like, or you love the match day experience and you don't know all the players, but you love the fact that you're meeting up with your mates before the game, and that's your kind of feeling of togetherness, and that's okay. And I don't know kind of how that can come through, whether it's marketing, how people talk about the game, but I think for women especially who think that they have to have a certain knowledge base to be a fan, like if you don't know X amount, then actually you're not a real football fan. And I think it's something that kind of we as the media have got a responsibility to do as well, and like explore what being a football fan means and showing that it is open for everyone.
I mean, that's really interesting for me. I mean, also just coming back to your kind of experience of how your work with Copper 90 and stuff like that. I mean, obviously you're getting quite a good insight into some of the issues that fans and female fans are coming back to you about. Are you finding that there is still that kind of innate prejudice existing within the senior levels of football? So that's my first question. And I'm going to ask both of you. Obviously, as you know, I'm on the board of the Don's Trust and is AFC Wimbledon, right? Completely, obviously, we're one of the greatest clubs known on the planet, obviously. But if I was to say, right, tomorrow you're going to be the CEO running AFC Wimbledon, what sort of things should a club be doing to help change that culture and make it much more of an appealing environment for female fans than it is now? So there's 2 questions there. So it'd be interesting. I'll come to you, Charlotte, and then Antonio, I'll give you the be an AFC Wimbledon CEO for a day question after that.
So can you just repeat the first question?
I was looking a bit about your kind of experiences within the game, and like what kind of problems are we that you kind of have experienced through Copper 90, and the kind of like that element of you know, a kind of collective concern that you're kind of getting, and the kind of changes that you're trying to make? You mentioned media as well in that bit, so there's two parts to that. So
yeah, so I can't, to be honest, since I've been at COPA90, it's actually been nothing but really positive experiences. I don't deal personally day to day with clubs, and I kind of sit more along the brand and network side. So everyone I speak to actually have really positive experiences. But one thing that we do over at COPA is we have a women and non-gender conforming working group, where we actually have got a target to how can we invite more diversity into COPA90. What can we do to make people feel that COPA90 is a place for them? And through that, we're doing different initiatives such as profiling different roles, getting people like myself or our CEO doing more talks to kind of show you the different kind of roles that there are in football. Something else that Antonio and I have been speaking to in preparation for this was like, how do we both get into football? And did we think that, have we always wanted to be in football? And the answer to that is no, but because we didn't know that that those sort of roles existed for people like us. So it's about like highlighting what women in sport and what these actual jobs are, and then making that more inviting for other people to come in. And organisations like Women in Football do it brilliantly, Fearless Women do it brilliantly, and they've got great networking groups. And again, it's just by being outwardly showing that this is what we're doing to support and that we welcome women in this organisation, creates a really positive experience. And we've got a really good network of women working at COPA now, and yeah, I know that a couple of them are listening now and will agree that they love it. And it feels like I've worked in a few different male orientated environments, should we say, and this is definitely a place where like, you really feel welcome. Like we've got a female MD, and she's wicked, and I know I can come to her for everything, but at the same time we've got our CEO Tom, who is just so open and welcoming and lovely, and he's actually speaking at a Women in Football conference next week about the importance of being a male ally, and knowing that senior management, like these are values that are really core for them. For me as a woman working in sport, I know that I've got no problems, and that if I ever do come across anything with anyone else that we work with, they will have my back, where maybe potentially in previous jobs I haven't felt so supportive.
Love to ask you more about previous jobs, but we'll come on to the
Off the record.
CEO. Yeah, the CEO of AFC Women for the day. What would you say is the things that need to be changed within that kind of environment?
Tough one. I think again,
I've got my pen scribbling away, by the way.
This isn't in my notes. No, I think again it goes back to the profiling the different women that work for me, and it's not just necessarily a tick boxing exercise of do I have a woman in every single department. It's actually just because that's one woman, there go, it's done. I'd be looking at the split. I'd be looking at how can we market jobs that are on and off the pitch to attract more women in, partnering with, if I felt that there wasn't necessarily a good understanding or culture throughout the business. Women in Football do a wonderful partnership where they actually coach and mentor and work with businesses to help them, if you're a commercial partner of theirs, to help the businesses become a more welcoming place for women in football to work. So probably looking at someone who would know what to do much better than I, and going over to them, it's probably what I would do.
Okay. Antonia, here's the keys to Plough Lane. You've got 24 hours to change.
Charlotte already covered so much. I think I would try to ensure that I wasn't the only woman leading the club. So ensuring quotas for the board. I know not everybody's in favor of it, but I'm a big fan of quotas. I think in addition to what Charlotte said, I would make sure that everybody working in the club, including the SLO and stewards, and everybody will get through some serious diversity and inclusion training. And the club following that up and evaluating that properly. I really liked what Louise from Tranmere Rovers said here, having a female supporter liaison officer in the position is brilliant, and I can imagine that it does change how female fans feel at the club, and maybe that's something that we should actually really seriously look at also at SD Europe to evaluate that and see what the benefits are, particularly for female fans. I would also make sure that the club would sign up to our new EU funded project, which is all about democracy in football, young people. So the idea is to get young people at football clubs involved in democratic structures at the club. It's like the next generation for football clubs, the next generation for supporters organizations, and the next generation for SD Europe as well, obviously. And there, in particular, we're trying to target is the wrong word, to reach out to female fans. And I think that I would try to help not just to educate the top, but to really make sure that supporters going to the games and being at the grounds really raise their bar when it comes to accepting women and girls on the grounds and not making them feel, and I'm not, like wanting to show that everybody's bad going to football, but to really make it more open also at the ground and having positive experiences there. So all the way from the top to the bottom.
So on that, I mean, we've covered a bit in our report today, but that idea of diversity enshrined in the club that both of you have talked about, how much of a difference and how important do you think that is, both within the culture of the club and the message it sends out? Charlotte, you mentioned about each level. I'd be interested just to know for you about what difference does that actually make? Because as we had a conversation a while ago, there'll be a number of, I'm going to use the word dinosaurs around who wouldn't necessarily be thinking along those lines. So how important is that in reality? I mean, I'm obviously looking at how we get the dinosaurs extinct, but that's my own personal view. But I'd just be interested, Charlotte, where you're at.
I think it's incredibly important, and not just for the kind of the attracting more diversity into the workplace. It really is visibility. You see it to believe it, and it's also then knowing that you've got the right to be there. And I think it was only up until, I've worked in football for about 15 years now, and it wasn't only until fairly recently, actually, after reading Anna Kessel's Eat, Sweat, Play, where she had a chapter on being a woman working in sport, that really made me think about and kind of recalibrate where I positioned myself. Because being the only girl on sales teams for the best part of 10 years, I was very much of the, thank you for having me, thank you for letting me be here. And I never, whilst I never necessarily got treated badly, I would still maybe be the one that had to go make the tea, or when we went on trips, I would be the one that would have to go and hold the itinerary, even though I was probably the most junior person there. But I was so thankful to be there because I didn't have any other women either above or below me to kind of compare to. I would just take whatever was given, because thank you for letting me be here. So I think it's not just about the bringing more inclusivity in from the kind of hiring perspective. I think it's to give women in the business the confidence to feel that actually this is a place for them, and they can see other routes that they can go. I think then when you look at it outside of the kind of hiring and jobs perspective into actually back to engaging fans, again, if they can see that that their clubs or their brands have got women at the heart of what they do, of course they're going to be able to market to them, and they're going to be able to, women do think differently to men, and then they're going to start to think the same way that they do. And again, it's about a club that shares values with them as a fan. So then it's going to help all those questions of how do we engage female fans? Well, let's get a mixture of men, women, non-gendered, conforming people together to think about it. And then you're not going to get just what one person thinks, and then that will have an effect down to bringing more fans on. Then you've got to go down to participation, and it's very much a see it to believe it across all levels. I think that's really important.
I come to Antonio on this. Obviously, I mean, I've been involved in the fans movement for quite a while. Obviously, being an AFC Women fan involved in the setting up of the club 20 odd years ago. Is this an issue that's rife to that same level amongst supporters, trusts, and amongst that, is there still an issue there about trying to change how welcome football are into the running of the football clubs? Because a lot of your SLOs will be people that have come through from the Supporters Trust movement. You see a lot of that, and increasingly there's board participation from fans as well. But is there still a problem? Is there a problem within Supporters Trust? Is my fundamental question, and is that something that SD Europe are looking at and how to address?
I definitely think that there is a problem. I can see it in, when we have our AGMs, and I think we're not doing that bad. We have a 50-50 board, and there are a couple of members who are run by women, but the majority has not that many female fans involved in their trusts or supporters groups. Trust is used in UK football mostly, but the supporters groups that are sort of equivalents to trust having the same problem. Definitely, that's one of the reasons why we put this project together, which we will start this year, which is really targeting the next generation of fans, and that includes particularly reaching out to young female fans and making them the leaders of those trusts and groups in the future. That is really a massive problem. But I also think maybe something that we haven't touched upon yet is that clubs and leagues and football associations across Europe are really worried that the supporters are not coming back to the stands as they were before COVID. And there are a lot of studies and surveys out about that. And there was one in Germany done not that long ago where a third of the 5,000 fans that were surveyed said that they've lost interest in football. And, big clubs like Borussia Dortmund are seeing this development that started before COVID, and it's getting worse and worse. And they are trying to look at how can they get them back. And I think that no club, no matter how big, can afford right now to just market the male fan. Yeah, this is like, if you reach out, like now is really the time. It's an opportunity. You can't afford to leave 50% of people aside and just look at, the usual. And I just want to say to the dinosaurs, I'm always torn between, should we try to change them? And I'm like, what's my experience with changing dinosaurs? Not very good. So I think that in general, it's about, they can roar as much as they want if the rest of us is roaring together and happy with what we've got and really making sure that we remain relevant and reaching out to the whole of the community and not just to the usual crowd. So yes, there is a problem, Neil, and we are addressing it.
Just to follow up on that, one of the stats that you actually sent me, Antonia, before when we were doing our prep for this was the fact that 42% of global football fans are women. And that's a huge number when you think of how many football fans there are out there. And it just blows my mind to think that that these people aren't going to, like you said, they can't afford not to market to these people. So that's a huge number. And even when I was doing some further research and at COP90, we've done the Modern Fan Report and found that a third of UK fans in the stadia are women. And that's huge when you're thinking of the number of the capacity of these stadia. That's a huge number of decision makers, spend makers that are just getting completely ignored.
I wanted to come on to that marketing point that you mentioned about, and obviously this is an area that you know quite well. The example of, I'm kind of interested in your kind of insight into how male dominated that targeting is when it comes to marketing opportunities, from the club shop through to the people that are sponsoring the stadium, through the people that are marketing, and just to kind of get a sense of equally how that is making it more of a male bastion than it almost certainly should be.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that to you when we first talked. One of my kind of my many things that I like to ponder is the fact that men's football is such a male-dominated space. Something that we've created, by we is that the greater we in terms of media and marketing have created ourselves by only putting adverts in men's toilets and not women's, by only advertising male brands, and everything that we do around it. Have we kind of created this ourselves? And you could also ask the same question back with women's football. Women's football, not just for women, shockingly. In fact, the latest research that we did and we found out was actually 54% of women football fans are men. And I think if we now just start to think about football fans as football fans, then you start to see the world differently. And then in answer to your question, I was actually watching the Spurs game last night and the adverts around it with great interest, because I wanted to see how male targeted they were. And actually, I was quite pleasantly surprised to see that the adverts now that were being played on Sky in between around the match were quite gender neutral, and they targeted men and women. I think the kind of main sponsors, like you've still got the Gillette Soccer Saturdays, and there is still the male brands that circle around men's football, and I think will be very hard to break that. But I do think that perhaps it's moving in the right direction, because brands are starting to realise that they can't just outside of football, they can't just target just men, and that women are decision makers too, and you're starting to see that come through in the creatives that we see. But I do think that the whole experience historically has been 100% men. When I worked at TalkSport, we would only, and I think I'd not worked there for 10 years, so I can't talk to their audience now. But again, it was very male. We would only have male brands on. And when I was working there, all of the presenters are male. But actually, if you look at what they're doing now, where you've got Laura Woods hosting the breakfast show, and I think you're now starting to see with more women talking about football, that then starts to make advertisers hopefully see football slightly differently as well, and you'll start to get maybe more gender neutral brands targeting women's football or men's football as well.
I mean, I find that hugely interesting. I mean, obviously the report that we just did today was saying things like 11% of the guests on the top 10 football podcasts are women, just 11%. So you're seeing, just not being even invited, there's no visibility going on, which is a huge issue. In terms of that marketing to female fans, I mean, Antonia, are we, as a football industry, completely missing a trick here? Is there stuff that's, actually making it more of an appealing environment? Is there something that football really needs to wake up to, and those dinosaurs need to start shifting themselves a little bit?
I think that it's pretty clear that following the status quo is really not an option, and football is part of society. So the issues that we as women are having in society, they're not isolated from what's happening in football. It's like, we always say, if you want a better community, if you want a better world, you need a better football club. And if you want a better football, it's interconnected. And I think that football has a history of always being a bit late. It hardly happens that anybody outs themselves, or, it is a bit of a dinosaur business. And I think that, a few people are really standing out at different stakeholders and different women in certain positions. But I really feel that it's, and I definitely also speak for myself, it's just incredibly hard. And there's definitely more support needed for women in general working in football and going to football. And I think that if football is not living up to what needs to happen now, then football will lose out on 50% of their community. It's not just about money, and of course it is, but in my mind, a football club serves a community as a social good, and if they don't serve women, they don't serve 50% of their community. And to me, that's not a good football club, and I don't think that it is these days sustainable. I don't think that football will get away with it for too much longer. Maybe that's more hoping it, but I don't know.
And that's me busy wanting to recruit both of you onto being being an NED for AFC Wimbledon. Definitely, I think there's so much for football clubs, and I speak as a representative of a football club, to learn. I think we do live in those dark ages in a lot of ways, and I think there's so much more that we need to open up to. We're coming towards the end of the session, so if there are any more questions, do please put them in the chat. I'd like to just kind of pass on kind of final comments. There's loads of stuff we haven't covered. I could chat to you guys for absolutely ages. I think it's so important. I've been scribbling away loads of notes and lovely quotes from you, both of you, so I've really appreciated that. But just kind of closing remarks really from you, Charlotte, and then from you, Antonia, and then we'll look at some questions as well. So, Charlotte first.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think it's quite simple in terms of how to engage women's football fans, and that is just that, like it just engage them, and stop thinking about one or the other, and it's just football fans. I think if you want to explore a little bit deeper, thinking about how, which we didn't get a chance to cover properly, in terms of how do women consume and interact and engage with football versus men. We spoke a little bit about women feel like they need to know a certain amount of level to be a fan, so therefore does that affect how they're actually engaged? Are they more likely to watch a game at home because it's safe, as opposed to going to a pub because they're going to get questioned? So maybe think about the kind of consumer behaviours around it because of the barriers to entry. But at its very basic level, if you are going to be thinking about the imagery that you use, it's so important. Thinking about who you've got on your board, thinking about who your partners are in terms of people like Kick It Out and Women in Football, or then they think about the values of the brands that you partner with, because all of that, from a women football fan, like not taking off my business hat completely, all of that affects how I would engage and interact with the club.
And Antonia?
I think that, again, Charlotte has said so many good things. I think that we don't need a whole spaceship to land. It's not anything crazy and outlandish what's needed to make the change. I think that those women who want to go to football, are going and working in football, should probably always remember that they are enough, they are good enough, and it's an environment that they should and can be in and should be in. And to men in the environment, I would say, you all have sisters, moms, daughters, and whatever. Do you want them to go to be in such an environment where they don't feel comfortable and supported? Like, seriously, is that what you want? It can't be. And I think that now, like I said earlier, there's such an opportunity here. Clubs need to look at who they are, what makes them a good club. And now is the opportunity to not just be more invitive and supportive of women, but in general be more inclusive and diverse.
Thank you so much, both of you. I've absolutely enjoyed every minute. It's been really lovely talking to you both. For everybody else, do obviously check into Fair Game's website, fairgameuk.org. Follow us on Twitter at Fair Game UK. Huge thanks to Charlotte. Huge thanks to Antonia. It's been a real pleasure to have both of you on here. Do stay in touch with us. You know where we are. And I hope to speak to you both soon. And I'll let everybody else now jump on and listen to our final keynote speaker for today. But thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Antonia. And thank you for everybody else.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Hey now,
How you doing?
how's it going?
Not bad. I'm just kind of getting into the right sessions for all of this.
Gotcha.
How's-
So we're gonna move over now to the other session. It's,
Okay.
Yeah, everybody's in there, so we're just waiting to get started, and then we'll take it from there.
All right, cool.
And you're good to end it. Yeah.